Today's shiur begins 11 lines from the top of Daf Chof Daled. Before we begin the shiur, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading. Hameid ani kohen v'chaveri kohen. Someone who testifies, I am a kohen and my friend is a kohen. Number 1, ha'im ne'emon la'achilo truma, or lahasio isha. Is a person believed with this comment to enable them to eat truma, or to have a woman of pure descent marry them? Number 2, ha'im yesh lachshosh legomlin. Is there room to suspect gomlin, which is a situation where each one will testify in order to receive the benefit of his friend's testimony later on. Now the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan. Ani kohen v'chaveri kohen. Ne'emon lahachilo b'truma v'eino ne'emon la'asio isha adshu shloisha. Shnayim me'idim al zeh u'shnayim me'idim al zeh. So we have two fellows. One fellow is saying, well, let us begin with a simple case. One person saying, I am a Kohen and my friend is a Kohen. So there is believability for establishing kahuna with regard to eating of truma. However, that's not sufficient for enabling them to marry a woman of pure descent. Rashi says, on the third line from the top, miyucheses, a woman of pure lineage, malehi biyuchsin. This is a stringency that we apply in the realm of yichus. Now, as far as that's concerned, adshu gimel, 3 people, shnayim mi'idim al zeh, u'shnayim mi'idim al zeh. You would have to have, let's say you have these 2 kohanim, so and each one is saying that his friend is a kohen. That's fine, but you've got to have another person also indicating that that friend is a kohen. So you would end up with 2 people on the friend. Regarding himself, so you would have the fellow kohen talking about the first guy, plus that outsider, 2 people on the first guy. But in the sum total of men that are present here, you've got the 2 kohen figures, each one testifying about his friend, plus an outsider for a total of 3 people. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Af Eino Ne'emon Lachilo Truma. Betruma. As far as the Tanakama's leniency regarding Truma, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. We're not going to believe them, the Kohen that says, I and my friend are Kohanim, we're not going to believe even regarding Truma. Adshu Shloisha. To have a total of 3 people. Shnayim me'idim al zeh, u'shnayim me'idim al zeh. As we just explained. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say that the claim about the friend being a Kohen is not believed? So, L'meimra, this would seem to suggest the Rabbi Yehuda chayesh l'goymlin, Rabbanan lo chayesh l'goymlin, chayeshi l'goymlin, that Rabbi Yehuda is concerned with, or fears the problem of maybe each one is trying to simply benefit the other in anticipation of receiving that benefit in exchange. That's the case of Gomlin. I'll help you because later you're going to help me. And the Rabbanan represent a position that's not worried about that. But as far as this issue of Gomlin is concerned, we've seen those opinions in an opposite position. Disnan. Hachamorin shenichnesu le'ir. Chamorin are donkey drivers. They're merchants that sell grains, and they carry them from the agricultural site into the cities. The Omar echad mehen, and one says, Shali chodosh v'shel chaveri yoshan. Shali eino mesukan v'shel chaveri mesukan. he says regarding his own stuff, my stuff is chodesh, is fresh grains, which is not good for people that buy grains. People would like to have dry grains, not fresh grains. So he says about his own, he deprecates his own merchandise. He says, my stuff is fresh. My friend's stuff, my friend that's over here with me, his stuff is good, is yashan, is aged. My stuff has not been tithed, is not mesukan. My friend's stuff has been tithed. So he's praising his friends while deprecating, denigrating his own. The Tanakama, the Rabbanan say, Eino Nemon, he is not believed. Now Rashi adds a little more information. Eino Nemon, Hayil v'amoratzu. He is, since we're dealing with ignoramuses, v'eino nemon ala meiser, they're not trustworthy with regard to the meiser tithing. Afal pi shemeyed al shelo she'eino mesukon, even though he's saying about his own stuff that it hasn't been tithed. V'yod shemoisif imzu dvarim acherim l'shabeches chavero. And in addition to the tithing issue, he adds other information regarding his friend's stuff, praising his friend's stuff. Eino nemon lahachzik es shel chavero b'cheskes mesukon. He is not believed to establish his friend's stuff as having been tithed. She'enon elo ma'arimin. These are people that are practicing subterfuge or connivery. And more ato kan v'ani b'mokam acher. I'll say this here, praising your stuff, and later you'll say the same thing about my stuff later. So in this case of the Chamorin, these merchants, the Tanakama is restrictive. He doesn't believe them. He doesn't accept their word. Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, Ne'emon, and Rabbi Yehuda does accept them. So do we not have a situation of let's say, contradictory sources? In source 1, the Tanakama was presented as someone that is not Choshesh Legomlin, and in source 2, they represent that suspicion. And Rabbi Yehuda in source 1 was suspicious, and in source 2 he doesn't seem to be suspicious. In the Gemara text you can see we've used a house marking now, and on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading we indicate that this goes till Omid Beis. These houses are Nisyonis Liyashev Stiros B'Shita Satanoim. We're here to attempt to resolve what appears to be a contradiction regarding the Tanaic opinions. So as you note here, and if you want to flip ahead to the Omid Beis, you'll notice that there are there's another house marking there as well. Omar Rav Ado Bar Ahava, Omar Rav Muchlefes Hashita. So Rav Ado says simply you have to switch around one of the sources, and you'll thereby achieve consistency. Abaye Omar Liolam Lo Tepuch. Abaye says there's no need to switch around the sources. And now we have to add that Rabbi Yehuda in general is Choshesh for Gomlin. And the reason in the case of the grain merchants that he is lenient is because we're talking about a case of Demai. Demai deals with a rabbinic imposed assumption of doubt regarding tithing, the tithing of Amei Haaretz. So you're dealing with a realm of, we'll say, relative leniency. And in the realm of Demai, which is the issue of did the Amoretz mafresh or not. So, as the Gemara says, b'demai hekilu. In the realm of Demai, we can afford to be lenient. Rov Amei Haaretz Maserim. That's based on the fact that the majority of the Amei Haaretz are people that are ignorant, they're not diligent in their halachic practice, especially in the realm of tithing, but the majority of them do tithe. They do mafresh, the meiser tithe. So it's for Rabbi Yehuda to say that we'll believe him when he says that his friend's stuff is tithe. Let's believe him. Omar Rava. Rava, upon hearing Abaye, what was Abaye doing? Abaye was resolving the seeming, what appeared before to be a contradiction within Rabbi Yehuda, so Abaye resolved that. Well, what about the Rabbanan? Omar Rava, the Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda, Kashya, the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan, Lo Kashya. Do take note, by the way, that Rava's comment goes to the top of Amud Beis. So Rava says, are you suggesting that Rabbi Yehuda was difficult and needed to be resolved, and the Rabbanan were not difficult? There was no contradiction there. Hello, rather the Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Kashya Kiddishaninon. As far as the Rabbi Yehuda seeming contradiction, there's no problem, as we answered, as Abaye answered. Fine, we accept your answer. The Rabbanan Lo Kashya, and as well, the Rabbanan are not contradictory either. In general, we tell you the Rabbanan are not choshesh for gomlin. And that was reflected in their ruling above, in the fellow saying, I'm a Kohen and my friend is a Kohen. We can give truma to the friend, and we're not choshesh for gomlin. Why, in the case of the grain merchants, were the Rabbanan restrictive? K'de'omar Rav Chama bar Ukva b'shekli u'menasoi biyadai. As Rav Chama says elsewhere, when the merchants of vessels of profession were in their hands, what's the vessels of his profession? Take, for example, a scale. He's carrying a scale around with him, and measuring vessels. We continue at the top of Amud Beis, where the Gemara continues this idea. We're saying the problem with the case of the grain merchants is like Rav Chama taught, Kli u'mnaso biyado, hachanami b'shekli u'mnaso biyado. What does that mean? So we look at the Rashi at the top of Amud Beis, b'shekli u'mnaso biyado, chamor hamevi tvua limkor, the grain merchant who's bringing the grains to sell, hoyanoise biyado kli heker shel mechira, he has with him vessels that make it clear that he's here for a sale. Kagon machak shemochkim bo hamida. This is a leveler, a device that when you heap the grains into a sack, you level it off in order to have an accurate measure, knowing how much the sack contains. V'amavia latznia. One who is transporting grain simply for storage purposes doesn't carry these vessels with him. Let's read that line again. He doesn't carry around sale vessels with him. In this case with the merchants, you have merchants that have their measuring devices with them. Danan, and this guy who is carrying the measuring vessels with him, and he's degrading his own stuff. Danan sadi shelamochra via. It's clear to us that he's here for sale purposes. Hilkoch ein ze ela gomel. It's clear that they have this plan, this scheme between them. V'zeh yoyed olav b'krach shelifneim. I'll degrade myself here and praise your stuff, provided in the next town you'll degrade your own stuff and praise mine. So it's basically, in simple terms, the Rabbanan in general are not choshesh for gomlin, but there are suspicious circumstances. You'll notice that we have a bracketed section. The starred note on the side says, Achrei Sogram Gemara Mavia Oid Yishuv L'Stir Bermuda. And notice there's an Eboyas Ema house shape later. After the bracketed section, that's another attempt, another resolution of the seeming contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda. Besoch hasograim haGemara mavia es hareka ledivrei Rabbi Chama bar Ukva. Within the brackets, we're now going to present the background that the Gemara cited. Where did Rabbi Chama bar Ukva make his comment? Maybe just for the sake of simplicity, let's just skip the bracketed section momentarily. V'iboy esema, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan b'malin mitruma liyuchsin komifligi. Essentially, this third approach is saying that in the first source, where they were saying Kohen ani v'chaveri Kohen, where the Tanakama says, well, based on that we can feed the fellow Truma, and Rabbi Yehuda says no. There, it's an issue having nothing to do with Goymlin, but rather it's an issue of what kind of conclusions do you draw when you see someone receiving Truma. Rabbi Yehuda, who was very hesitant to allow the friend to receive Truma, that's because, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when you see someone eating Truma, you're allowed to reach conclusions regarding purity of lineage. And therefore, if we give the guy Truma, people will conclude we can also give him a woman of pure lineage to marry. And as far as Yuchasin are concerned, we know that we're strict with regard to Yuchasin, not relying on the word of one person. So, in order to preserve the issue of Yuchasin, Rabbi Yehuda holding that we go from Truma. If you see someone eating Truma, you're allowed to draw conclusions regarding his purity of pedigree. Don't give him the Truma. That will lead to an undue leniency regarding Yuchsin. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, hold that if you see someone eating Truma, you don't come to any Yuchasin conclusions. So, big deal if we give him to eat Truma. So we'll rely on his testimony regarding the kahuna to feed him Truma. That's not going to lead us to any conclusions regarding Yuchasin. Now we go to the bracketed section. Vehecha itmar de Rebbe Chama bar Ukva. Where did he say his thing? The Gemara answers. Note we have a long answer marking. Aha disnan, regarding the following source. Hakador. A kador is a person who makes and sells clay vessels, jugs, barrels, and the like. He's the kador, and in this case, we're talking about a kador that is a chover. A chover is someone who is diligent with regard to maintenance of purity of tahara. Hakador shiniach kedei roisav yorad lishtois. Kador placed down his jugs and his pots and went to take a drink. So he left them, we'll say, unattended. Hapnimios tahiros v'achitzonos tameos. The inner ones, if he set them up in rows, so the inner rows are tor, the outer rows are tome, are considered, by the time he comes back, are considered tome. The outer ones are considered tome. Of course, we have to explain this later. I just noticed, as we're learning right now, I noticed a Rashi that is we call it a structural Rashi, which helps to justify our method of marking. Notice the Rashi on the first or the second narrow line, Hapnimios Tahoros, Kula Mitartsa V'Ozla L'Kamei. That all of this, Rashi is pointing out, all of this, the next few lines are all part of the answer. We had asked the question, where did Rebbe Chama bar Ukva say his point? So it's based on all of these lines of Gemara. That's why we have a long answer marking. Well, the Gemara continues after source 1 indicating the inner row are tahor and the outer row are tameh, and we do have a triangle marking explained on the center of the mivneh. These are Gimel Makoros, Niros, Sosro Ze'ezeh, Be'inyan Tumas HaKederos. We have 3 Tanaic sources that seem to be contradictory regarding the defilement or lack thereof of these vessels. So we go to source number 2, now, the second triangle, V'atanya Elu Ve'elu Tameos. We have another source that says the inner row and the outer row are Tameos. Omar Rabbi Chama bar Ukva, B'shekli umnoso Biyodo. Source number 2, where all of the barrels are tameh, is a case where the kador is there with his vessels of sale. Rashi says, leheker shu noison lemochron. He has a sign, let's say, that says for sale. That's a heker, something that makes it noticeable, recognizable that he is there. He's carrying these around not for mere transportation, but for sale purposes. And the reason that all the rows of kederos are tamei, b'nei sheyad hakol mimashmeshes, by all people, including people that are defiled, including amaratzim, they're handling them to investigate, to check each barrel out. Is this something I would like to buy? They pick up one, say, no, I don't like this. They pick up another one, handling all of them. So the public is then inevitably going to be handling all of the barrels, and that is reason for us to impose tuma on the panimios as well, the inner rows as well. Question, V'atanya elu ve'elu toros. We have another source that says that all are tohor. Omer of Chama Barukfa b'she'ein kli umnoso biyado. That's a case where the barrels have been lined up, but they're not for sale. The guy carrying the barrels are there just for transportation purposes. There's no for sale sign. Well, what about case 1, that a distinction was made? Case 2, where everything is tamei, that's where it's there for sale. Case 3, where everything is torah, so it's not for sale. Where's case 1 where a distinction was made between inner row and outer row? Heichi mishkachas lo, where do we find that? Answer, the smicho l'rishus harabim umishum chipufe rishus harabim. You have a case where the barrels were lined up to separate we'll call the homes, or the side that's of a central thoroughfare. The thoroughfare is called Rishus Harabim. So as to keep people away from, let's say, banging into the walls of houses that line the public thoroughfare, people would set up rows of barrels. The outer row would have contact with the public. The inner row, between that outer row and the walls of the houses, people don't have contact with them. Let's take a look at Rashi together. Umishim chipufe rishus harabim, shenoisim be'adam avonim gdolos o yesedos litzidi rishus harabim. People set up blockades along the thoroughfare, laharchik va'golos mi lahazik asaksolim, to distance the carts from ramming into, rubbing against the walls along the thoroughfare. Umitov shein dochas as rishus harabim, since the v'zeh hiniach kederus of etzlam docha gamhu es haderech. These barrels, which serve as a blockade, end up pushing the public further away from the houses. Those that pass rub into them. Aviron, and the clothing that people wear, since the people are rubbing into these barrels, their clothing can end up going over the openings of the barrels. The clothing of Amoratzim are viewed as tamei, and once they get into the airspace of these clay barrels, it's mitama, all of them as well. And of course, we're dealing with that outer row that lines the thoroughfare. The inner row, though, doesn't come into contact with the people passing by and their clothing. And with that, you can see we finished the bracketed section. And the iboy sema, this is a third approach to the issue of the contradiction, the seeming contradiction, Rabbi Yehunasan Berger, that we raised on Amud Aleph. And the third approach says that the first source, with the fellow saying Kohen Ani v'chaveri Kohen, Rabbi Yehunasan Rabbanon b'malin mitruma liyuchsin kamifli. There, as we explained before, the issue was, what conclusions do we draw when we see someone eating truma? Do we assume he is miyuchas or not? Rabbi Yehuda says yes, we will assume is miyuchas, and therefore we cannot be lenient and give someone to eat truma based on the testimony of one person. The double underline marking that we have just seen is explained on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading. The double underline, you'll see, highlights the expression Malin Liyuchasin. It has to do with raising people to the status of being considered pure lineage. Devorim shonim, different things. Haroya oisam, one who sees them. Hayim efshel asik maskonish shezeh odam yuchas. Can we then draw a conclusion based on witnessing certain things that this is a person of pure lineage? Lasio isha, in order to enable him to marry a woman of pure descent. Uvan of you ksherim lekuna, and his offspring would then be acceptable into the kuna. If they produce girls, they could marry a Kohen. If they are boys, they could then enjoy Kohen status. A bow tie shape will appear. The bow ties that you see on this omid are she'elois, are questions, ma'al la'alois mishtoros, or minasias kapayim. Can we draw conclusions from information that concerning someone as a Kohen that's written into a document, and on the document people sign as witnesses? Does the testimony on the signing of a document in which reference is made to so and so as being a Kohen, like saying that David the Kohen lent $100 to Bill, and at the bottom of the shtar, witnesses sign their names. So are they testifying that David is a Kohen, or are they simply testifying that a loan was extended, but not with regard to the rest of the information? Likewise, if you see a man rising to the duchan, the platform on which the Kohanim stand in blessing the community, we call Nasias Kapayim, because Kohanim duchaning. If you see someone doing that, can you assume that he is a Kohen and hence of pure lineage? Now we turn to the Gemara. Ibaya laho. Ma'u lahalois mishtoros liyuchsin. Can we raise someone to a position of pure lineage? In other words, establish his being of pure lineage from information we see in a shtar. Hechi domi. So what are you talking about? Ilemo dechsiv bei ani ploni kohen chosamti eid. I, so and so, the Kohen, have signed as a witness. Man komasid ulei. So who's testifying about him? There's no one testifying about it. It's just someone saying, I, so and so, I'm a Kohen, have signed as witness. That doesn't indicate through testimony that so and so was a Kohen. Lo tzricha, that what is needed to investigate is dichtiv bei ani ploni Kohen lovisi mona mi ploni. You have a document in which someone writes, I, so and so, the Kohen. In other words, Reuven the Kohen borrowed $100 from Dave. The Chasimu Sadi, and witnesses sign that document. What do we conclude from this? Amona shebeshtar komisidi, the witnesses that signed the document, are they signing simply with regard to the money? The mona literally is 100, but also means the money amount mentioned in the document. Or possibly their testimony concerns all the information in the document. In other words, you have two witnesses verifying or testifying that so and so that loaned the money, that borrowed the money, was a Kohen. Rav Huna Rav Chisda Chadamer Malin v'Chadamer Ein Malin. You have a machlokes here between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, one saying that the testimony at the bottom of this document concerns all the information, and therefore we can raise him, grant him yichus status based on the shtar and the witnesses therein. And the other opinion says no. Note, this is a long question. It's with an Aleph O Dilma Bay structure to it, and it's a little more elaborate than that, as we will see as we go on. Can we conclude from the fact that someone is doing Nesias Kapayim, he's doing the priestly blessing we call Birkas Kohanim, from that come to a conclusion regarding Yuchasin? Well, this is a general question, and it can be broken down as follows. We already saw regarding Truma, that was the first double underline. We saw that was a machlokus between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan according to the third approach, the third house approach above. We saw there a machlokes regarding going from Truma, concluding from someone eating Truma to his yichud status. That we've seen. The question of going from Nesias Kapayim Liuchsin can be raised according to each one of those opinions. In other words, someone might have a clear opinion regarding Truma and it's leading to Yuchsin. Whatever their stance is regarding Truma, there's still room for asking the question, what about from Nesias Kapayim Liuchsin? And everything will be spelled out as we go on in the Gemara. We can raise this question according to the opinion that says you are maleh from Truma liyuchasin. In fact, that was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that we saw earlier. Hani mili Truma. It might be that from Truma you can conclude to yichus. Truma is a serious matter in and of itself. D'avon misahi. To allow someone to eat Truma, if he is not a genuine Kohen, he is getting himself involved with a problem penalized by death at the hands of heaven. Avol Nesias Kapayim, the Isur Aseh lo. But seeing someone do Nesias Kapayim, that's not even if he's not a Kohen, he's not involved with a serious offense. He's guilty of what's called an Isur Aseh. That means a non-Kohen doing Nesias Kapayim is violating that which the Torah says. The Torah says that the Kohanim are to bless the people. What can you infer from that? That not Zorim, non-Kohanim, do not bless the people. So what happens when you have a negative type command that's derived through an inference from a positive command? In other words, it's not an explicit negative command saying non-Kohanim shall not bless. That's not what the Torah says. The Torah says Kohanim shall bless. Inference, non-Kohanim shall not bless. What status does that have in the realm of halacha? It's called an Isur Aseh, and which for our purposes means it's a low level type offense relative to a non-Kohen eating Truma. So when it comes to the eating of Truma, which carries with it a heavy penalty, you are able to conclude that one who eats Truma is also miyuchas. However, if you see someone doing Nesias Kapayim, or even if a non-Kohen were to do it, he wouldn't be involved with a serious offense, I can't come to any conclusions. That's one possible analysis. Oy dilma lo shna. Or maybe we don't make that distinction. And just like you see malin mitruma liyuchsin, he will hold your malin minesias kapayim liyuchsin. So the question of nesias kapayim to yuchsin is raised within the opinion that says that you go your mala from truma liyuchsin. We continue. Tiboy l'madar ma'ain malin. Now we'll present the same issue of going from nesias kapayim liyuchsin. We'll go according to the opinion that says we don't go from truma to yuchsin. And now the analysis. Hani mili truma de misakla betzina. We saw the opinion of the Rabbanan that we don't conclude from one who's eating truma that he is milchos, because truma is something that people will do in private. People eat in private. Avonesias kapayim the farhesya, the blessing of the kohanim that's done in public. Ilav the kohen if he wasn't a real Kohen, Kulei Hailo Machzif Inish Nafsha, a person wouldn't be so bold and audacious to go and do the priestly blessing, a public affair, a public display, when he himself is not a Kohen. That would be true chutzpah. And people aren't that mechutzafim. People aren't that full of chutzpah. Oh, Dilma Lo Shlo, maybe? No. Just like you say you're not maleh from Truma Liuchsin, who won't be maleh from Birkos Kehanim from Nesias Kapayim Liuchsin. So the question then has been asked, are we maleh mi Nesias Kapayim Liuchsin? Rav Chisda of Rav Avina, Chad Omer Malin, v'Chad Omer Ein Malin. And so the issue boils down to a machlokes amoroyim. Omar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok l'Rava. Malu lahalois minasias kapayim liuchsin. You notice that we have a dashed bow tie. The reason for that is because this is simply not a new question. So Omar le Rava answers Plukta de Rav Chisda v'Rebbe Avina. We just saw those two opinions just a few lines up. You can see with the star marking on the side of the Gemara text where we saw that. Hilchos Somai. The Gemara now wants to know, bottom line, what is the halacha? And now we have a long answer. Rava responds. It's a long response. But then after the long response, you'll notice 4 lines from the bottom, the Gemara has a dechia, a rejection of the long response, of this answer. A word, though, of structure is in order. In addition, an additional word. If we look at the side of the Gemara, we have what we call a tatnos, a subtopic heading, mivneh, with a structural note. We have a volcano shape, and we also indicate on Chav Hey Amud Aleph, yesh shinui kivun. And we also note that this issue continues till Chav Hey Amud Beis. If you have access to Chav Hey Amud Beis, you want to turn ahead or scroll ahead, you'll notice that the volcano shape continues to appear at the top of Chav Hey Amud Beis as well. So there's quite a long discussion, and we continue reading our note. Nisyonoi shel Rava. What we're going to see here in the Gemara is Rava's attempt lahavi raya to bring proof to ein malin minisis kapayim liuchsin, that we don't draw conclusions from one scene doing nisis kapayim regarding yichus. Meha the oile hagoyla bizman Ezra nasu kapayim lamros shoya yichusam mefukpak. We'll see that in the return to Israel in the time of the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, the community that returned with Ezra, who was the leader at the time, the community that joined him from leaving Bavel back to the land of Israel, they did Nesias Kapayim, even though they were known to be of questionable pedigree. So what Rava wants to conclude from that is that we're not mala from the Nesias Kapayim liuchsin, as we saw in the case of Ezra. Now the Gemara, we noted already the inverted volcano shape is essentially this attempts, nisyonis lochiach shemalis. Those will be attempts to show that we are ma'aleh. Okay, now the text. Amarle ano masnisa yodana. Rava says, I know a Tanaic source from which we'll conclude that ein malin. Tesanya Rabbi Yosi Omer Gedola Chazaka. The term Gedola Chazaka, Rashi says, she'ein bezin yicholim lahotzi davar mechezkaso. Chazaka is an assumed or given status. And based in, the court cannot alter something that has a given status. So Gedola Sahul. Now, what application that has, that we have to wait and see. But Rabbi Yossi opens up with the comment that an assumed status or a given status is something that is strong. Shenemar. And now we have a pasuk quote, and this is a very long scriptural quote. It spans several psukim in the book of Ezra. You have pasuk Samach Aleph, and then later Samach Beis, and pasuk Samach Gimel. The book of Ezra features that time period where the Jews came back from exile and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, and it says as follows: Umi bnei HaKohenim bnei Chavaya bnei HaKotz bnei Barzilai asher lokach mibnos Barzilai gilui isha. There were amongst the returnees descendants from these different Kohen families, Vayikore al Shmom, and they had the name of their families. Eile bikshu ksavam hamesyachsim v'lo nimtzo. They sought out their genealogical records. The ksavam hamesyachsim. The word mesyachsim, even though here you see it with a sin, also we're familiar with the samach, the same word. They sought out their sifrei yuchsin, their books affirming their lineage, their purity of pedigree. V'lo nimtzo, they were not found. Vayigoalu min hakuna. Vayigoalu means they were nifsalu. They were rendered unfit regarding the kahuna. Vayoma tirshasa lahem. The tirshasa is Nehemiah. It's a name for Nehemiah. Nehemiah was one of the leaders at that time, along with Ezra. So, Vayomar tirshasa lahem asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakodashim Adamod Kain Lurim V'tumim. Here we're just going to just give a very, very superficial translation. According to Rashi, at this point the pasuk means that Nehemiah says they shall not eat from Kodesh HaKadoshim. That means from sacrificial meat. They shall not eat from sacrifices, leaving room to infer that they are allowed to eat from truma. Truma is something that they had been acquainted with when they were in the Golos. When they were in the diaspora, they were eating truma. So that which they were used to doing in the diaspora, Nehemiah did not impose a restriction on them because of the chazaka, their status. They had the status of being truma eaters. They continue that in Israel. And this restriction on the kohanim from eating sacrificial meat, until the eventual, we'll call it the eventual geula comes about. And in the second Beis HaMikdash, the Urim v'Tumim, which were the stones on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, which had certain miraculous features, they were not present in the second Beis HaMikdash. So he's saying to them basically, and we'll see of course this later in the Gemara, he's saying to them, you cannot eat from korbanos until the ultimate redemption. Amar lahem. Nehemiah says to them, now we finished quoting the psukim, now the Brisa interprets, Amar lahem, harei atem b'cheskaschem, b'mesha isim oichlim b'goyla, b'kotshei hagvul. You're able to maintain your chazaka, your status, that which you ate in the diaspora, means outside of Israel. You ate truma. Kotshei hagvul means truma. Afkan b'kotshei hagvul. So too in Israel, you will eat from truma. And now the ikar, in my opinion, is missing in the text, but Rashi fills it in, and that's why we wrote it in between the lines. And that is, you will also continue nesias kapayim, meaning just like in the diaspora in Bovel, in exile, you were doing Nesias Kapayim, continue doing that now that we've arrived in Israel. So what do we have? We have a population, including Kehanim, of questionable heritage. We saw in the source, they sought out their books of pedigree, or books of lineage, and they could not find them. And it says in the pasuk they were cast out of the kahuna. And these very people are going to continue doing Nesias Kapayim. If you would think that you can come to yichus conclusions from seeing people do the priestly blessing, Hani, these guys, and featured in this source, Kevan de Parsiadayo, since they are going to be doing Parsiadayo is Nesias Kapayim, Osi La'asukinu. You're going to end up, if you were to hold Malim Nesias Kapayim, you're going to end up giving them Yichus status. And if you're going to give them Yichus status, so of what benefit was there to issue a ruling that they're cast out of the kahuna? So from this we conclude that you're not going to draw any conclusions from seeing someone do Nesias Kapayim. The Gemara responds to this with a dechia. Shiny hacha. This case is different, and we have to add, and based on what you can see in the Rashi as well, that in general we are male mi Nesias Kapayim liyuchsin. Here, with regard to the returnees from the exile, there isn't any chashash, there's no suspicion that they will go that far. In other words, in general, yes, you're ma'ala min Nesias Kapayim liyuchsin. Here, there's a built-in safety mechanism. Here, we can allow them to do Nesias Kapayim, and we won't come to yichus conclusions. That's the Gemara. Now we read it in the text. Shiny hacha. This case featured in the source with the returnees from the exile. This is different. The Re'ah Chazkayu. There's a weakness to their status. What's the weakness? What's we'll say the obvious, recognizable weakness to their Kohen status? We saw that they are not going to be partaking of the sacrifices that are offered. Everyone will see all the other Kohanim eating from sacrifices. These guys are not. That is a very obvious testimony that these guys are not miyuchas. But in general, other times, Rashi says, like nowadays, you can rely on the Nesias Kapayim for yichus purposes. So now in the Gemara, we said that shiny hoch the reach eskayu. There was in general we can rely on the Nesias Kapayim to conclude yichus purposes. In this case, with the returnees, we'll let them do Nesias Kapayim, but they're not going to come to any yichus conclusions because there's a built-in demonstration that they're not reliable as Kohanim. That's Re'ah Chazkayu. Re'ah means weakened, Chazkayu, their Kohen status. If you don't accept this logic that we are to be soymech on the built-in hecker, if you're not going to accept that, according to the opinion that we've seen earlier, we made reference to this above. We said that was a machlokis between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. So according to the opinion that of Rabbi Yehuda that says we conclude from truma eating to yuchasin, we said in this source that these returnees will be eating from truma. Well, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then if you see someone eating truma, you consider him miyuchas. And how could you consider these guys miyuchas, these returnees? Elolav. So it must be mishum dereya chizka, because there's this built-in weakness to their chizka, their chizkas puna status. We can allow them to eat truma and not come to a yichus conclusion, even though in general we would come to a yichus conclusion. Why here won't we come to the yichus conclusion from the truma eating? Because reya chizka, we saw a weakness to them that they were not eating from sacrificial meat. That would be the safety mechanism. Then, in this case, not ma'aleh from truma yuchsin, even though in general we would. Now you can see that we have a long bracketed section, and this, at the end of the long bracketed section, we have an inverted volcano shape. And if we skip there momentarily, you can see it says Toshma Chazoka Lekahuna, a basis for establishing someone to be a Kohen, Nesias Kapayim Bebavel, V'achilus Chala Besurya, V'chiluk Matonis Bekrochim. If you see someone doing the priestly blessing in Bavel, then you can assume he is a Kohen. And if you see someone eating challah in Surya, challah is a dough tithe, and you see someone eating that in Surya, this is an area right adjacent to Eretz Yisrael, and then you can come to kahuna conclusions. And if you see the distribution of the specific parts of an animal, they call them matnas kahuna, the zroa, l'chaim and keva, the arm, the cheek, and the stomach of slaughtered animals. If you see someone receiving those portions, those are priestly sections that are given, priestly animal sections that are given to kohanim. So if you see them, someone receiving those in krochim, in cities, you can come to conclude that the receiver is a kohen. Kotoni mias nesias kapayim. Now it says in this source, if you see someone do the priestly blessing, my lav liuchsin, does that not mean that from nesias kapayim we will conclude that he is meyuchas? So this Toshma that we just read is an attempt to show that we're male from nesias kapayim to yuchsin. The Gemara will reject that and says that's not what the source is teaching at all. But before we get to that, we have to go through the bracketed section. The Gemara at the top, the Rashi at the top line, the Alamai Gedoylo Chazaka to Gemara Rabbi Yossi, Lama Lanu Lachush Lahashbis Cheskosam, Kima Yesh Lachush Levatola, or Levatla. We said in the source on Omid Aleph and on Chav Dalam and Beis, and you can of course use the arrow to help you find the quote back on Chav Dalam and Beis, where you see the corresponding arrow in the lower third of the page, where the Gemara said Gedola Chazaka. We said Gedola Chazaka, that the fact that they had that Kohen status enables them to continue eating truma. But this term Gedola Chazaka indicates that there's some kind of suspicion or doubt that hovers above us, that we have to dismiss by proclaiming Gedola Chazaka. So what's the issue over here? The Gemara. Ve'elamai Gedola Chazaka. The Gemara says, Ve'ikara achol b'truma d'Rabbanan. When they were in the exile, they were eating truma that's required only by the Rabbanan. Only in Eretz Yisrael, only in the land of Israel proper, is truma something that's on a Torah level. Truma d'Rabbanan is relatively speaking, is a minor type thing. So originally they were eating truma d'Rabbanan. Hashta, now that they've come to Israel, achol b'truma d'oraisa. The chazaka that they have entitles them to eat even truma d'oraisa. That's what's meant by gedola chazaka. How strong chazaka, the chazaka phenomenon is. V'boyesema. Another approach to this is hashtanami b'truma d'Rabbanan achol b'truma d'oraisa lo achol. Now that they've come from the exile into Eretz Yisrael, they're still going to be limited to truma d'Rabbanan and not be allowed to eat truma d'oraisa. V'chi maskinon mitruma liyuchsin. When we have people determined to be miyuchas as a result of truma eating, that is betruma d'oraisa. Betruma d'Rabbanan lo maskinon. When it comes to, you see someone eating truma of a rabbinic nature, that, by the way, Rashi tells us, is tithe that you take from fruit growing on trees. The Torah requirement of tithes includes only Dogon, Tirosh, and Yitzhar, which has to do with grains, wine, and olive oil, not other agricultural products. The other agricultural products are considered tithable or requiring tithing only on a rabbinic level. So from that kind of eating, Truma D'Rabbanan, you don't come to Yichus conclusions anyway. Well, if that's your approach then to the returnees, that they're only going to be eating Truma D'Rabbanan, just like they were doing in the diaspora, then the Elamai Gedola Chazakas, and what's the big deal about the Chazaka? We said that they have that great is the strength of Chazaka. Well, for what purposes? So the Gemara answers: the Afagav the Ikola Migzar Mishum Truma D'Oraisa Lo Gazrina. Even though there was room to be suspicious or worried that if you allow someone to eat Truma D'Rabbanan, they're going to come to eat Truma D'Oraisa. And as is the case in many areas of halacha, where a fear like that exists, we impose a restriction, and we would tell them, don't eat even Truma D'Rabbanan, so that you don't come to eat Truma D'Oraisa. So, to counter that, we say Gedola Chazaka. We don't impose that restriction. We allow these people of questionable lineage to eat Truma D'Rabbanan, just like they were eating in the exile, without fearing that that's going to lead to them eating Truma D'Oraisa. The Gemara asks, Ube Truma D'Oraisa lo achol? Is that really so that they did not eat from Truma D'Oraisa v'aksiv? The pasuk said, Asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakadoshim. When they couldn't produce their books of pedigree, their documents indicating their purity, the pasuk says they were cast out of the kahuna and they did not eat from kodesh hakadoshim. Mikodesh hakadoshim hu lo achol. They didn't eat from sacrificial meat. Ha b'truma d'oraisa ho. We can infer, but truma they did eat, even truma d'oraisa. So how can we accept this approach that they did not eat truma d'oraisa? The Gemara answers, Hachi ka'omar. The pasuk that said Asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakadoshim means as follows: Lo b'midi dikri kodesh, and if you just skip to the next line, v'lo b'midi dikri kodshim. They did not eat from that which is called kodesh, nor did they eat from something called kodoshim. So that the expression they didn't eat from kodesh hakadoshim is a reference to two different products. What are they? Or two different entities. Well, let's read the Gemara again. Lo b'midi de'ikri kodesh, dichtiv regarding truma. It says v'cholzor lo yochal kodesh. We dash on line kodesh. Kodesh is truma. It says in the pasuk that all zar, that means non-kohanim, shall not eat from kodesh. What is restricted to a non-kohen? Truma is that which is restricted from a non-kohen. V'lo b'midi dikri kodshim, those returnees, the questionable kohanim returnees that couldn't find their books of lineage, their ksav ha-yichus, they didn't eat from kodshim. What's kodshim? That's the portions a kohen receives from sacrifices. Dechtiv uvas kohen kisya leishzor hi betrumas hakodoshim lo tochal. Now we dash the word kodoshim. The pasuk describes a daughter of a kohen who marries a non-kohen. She doesn't eat from this thing called trumas hakodoshim. Now the word truma could be a tricky word, and the Gemara explains, "V'omar b'muram min hakodoshim lo tochal." She shall not eat from those portions that are raised or separated from sacrifices. In general, when you have we'll call peace offerings, as korban shlomim, those korban shlomim actually covers a number of different kinds of korbanos. That type of korban, we'll call it korban shlomim. A kohen receives a portion of the animal, the rest of it being eaten by the owner. So this idea of a portion separated from the animal sacrifice given to standard kohanim is muram min hakodashim, something separated from the sacrifices. But for our purposes, without getting too steeped in details, when the pasuk said that the returnees of questionable kohen status will not eat from kodesh hakodashim, they were allowed to eat truma d'Rabbanan, not eat truma d'Oraisa. And we know that from the phrase that said they did not eat from kodesh hakodashim. Asher lo yochlu mi kodesh hakodashim. Kodesh is truma, they did not eat. Kodashim, they did not eat from the sacrifices. So truma d'Oraisa they did not eat, but truma d'Rabbanan they did eat. And that was a function of Gedola Chazaka. Toshma. And here we have the inverted volcano shape. Chazaka l'kahuna. And what's the goal of this Toshma? It's an attempt to show that we will conclude from the Siyas Kapayim that a person is miyuchas. Chazaka l'kahuna, the basis upon which someone can testify that so-and-so is a kohen, the Siyas Kapayim beBavel. If you see someone doing birkas kehanim in Bavel, v'achilas chala b'Surya, someone eating from the dough tithe in the Surya region, v'chiluk matonos b'krachim, and the receipt of the various portions of chulin that are distributed to kehanim, and you see them eating that in the krachim, in the cities. The source has a lot of details, but we're interested only in one point. Kotoni mias nesiyas kapayim. It said in this source, you can come to kohen conclusions from the Siyas Kapayim. My lav liyuchsin. Is it not that we mean that we conclude that he is a kohen of pure lineage? So that in simple terms, from this source we see malin min Siyas Kapayim liyuchsin. Gemara says lo l'truma. This source that says chazaka l'kuna, that you can come to conclusions from the Siyas Kapayim, that means if you see someone doing the Siyas Kapayim in Bavel, so you can give him truma. Truma is the tithe given to kehanim. There's a Rashi that appears in the lower half of the page as a star. Lo l'truma haroehu noisei kapov b'Bavel o echel chala dafke b'Surya. If you saw someone, if you knew someone was doing birkas kehanim in Bavel, or you saw him eating challah, the dough tithe, in Surya, and this information was presented in Eretz Yisrael, we'll use this information to enable him to eat truma, but not for yuchasin. The Gemara asks, in the same source that Nesiyas Kapayim appeared, it also said Achilas Chala allows you to come to conclusions. Ma Achilas Chala liyuchsin, af Nesiyas Kapayim liyuchsin. We're making an assumption right now that just like Achilas Chala, if you see someone eating challah, you can come to yichus conclusions. So too, appearing in the same source, the Siyas Kapayim, you would come to yichus conclusions. The Gemara says, lo, that's not how to understand the source. Achilas chala gufa l'truma. The information that you see, or that you conclude from, you're seeing someone eat challah, that only has reflection on his ability to eat truma. If you see someone eating challah b'Surya, you can conclude that this person can receive truma. So at this point, just like the Siyas Kapayim is good enough only for truma, so too Achilas Challah is good enough only for truma. Amir Hashem, in our next shiur, we'll have to go over this point so as to be able to continue with the discussion that we're leaving off with right now.